Yes. So Tarcisio, please.
Yes. Okay, thanks a lot, Fomiak, for inviting me, for giving this webinar today. It's with a great pleasure to be here and also be part of the community. As you said, my name is Tarcisio, and I'm co-leading the Knowledge Representation Unit at the Swiss Institute of Bioinformatics, SIB. We are a knowledge representation unit there at SIB. Actually, it's like a multi-site unit because we have two different locations in Switzerland, one in Zurich, another one in Lausanne. And today I would like to talk a little bit about what I have been doing around knowledge representation ontologies in the era of large language models. But first, I think maybe it's not, not everybody's aware what SIB is. Then I would like to present quickly, if I manage to pass the slides, because I'm not passing anymore. Somehow it's blocked. Okay. Okay, I'll stop sharing. I'll start again because somehow it's not. I have a. Sorry about that. Some hidden issue. Okay. Sharing it again. Okay, hopefully it's working now. Yeah, is it working for you? Okay, perfect. Yes, then what is SIB in brief? We are a national network of about 900 scientists. Among these scientists, most of us are members of affiliated groups that compose this network. And actually, the SIB acts as a federation of these different research groups across Switzerland in different institutions at like universities. But we also have employees that works directly in the institution, like me. For those employees, we are around 200 in 4 different locations. We are also a non-profit and independent organization. And we are considered the Swiss node of Elixir, the European life science infrastructure. Then going back to the topic of my talk about knowledge representation in artificial intelligence. In this context, knowledge representation aims at modeling information in a structured manner to formally represent it as a knowledge and reason of it. For example, enabling automated reasoning or based in logics. That relies also in formalisms like ontologies, as you are aware of it. Also knowledge graphs that can be also built based on ontologies, either as a kind of a data schema or to represent values in this knowledge graph, essentially. Or it can be also both. Then as a motivation, why it's important knowledge representation, I suspect also most of you in the call are aware of these kind of things, but I would like to begin with a definition, like for instance, a high level concept, like for instance, a gene. In a specific dictionary, we're going to have a first definition that is a kind of collapsed. We have a concatenated one, like the first one. We say that's a basic physical unit of heredity, and also a linear sequence of nucleotides and so on. But also there is a second definition in this dictionary that a gene can be also a short name of a gene, a male given name. When you look at another dictionary, this I would call like knowledge actually is represented a different way, more structured in this dictionary. For the first definition, you have it's breaking down to 2 separate ones, where you have a definition of like more like an informal use of about the unit of heredity, and then gives an example, play-10 is in my genes. And you also have the technical use that goes more into direction of a sequence of nucleotides, that's more in genetics terms. But here it means, for instance, the third definition that would from another dictionary that would be a short term and so on. Then you can see I read just for defining like a high level concept like a gene is not that straightforward, and then it can be done in different ways. Then you have some level of heterogeneity and different ways of structuring the information. This is even more exacerbated when you're talking about scientific data. Then just to say a little bit, a brief history of bioinformatics databases, and going back for the concept of a gene, when in terms of scientific data, like for research, they'll be often interested in one given gene. And this gene, even to avoid ambiguities for different meanings and so on, they need to be identified some way. And then I'm quoting Mike Ashburn, a professor of genetics at the University of Cambridge, that says that a biologist would rather share the toothbrush than the gene name. Then you can see that the complexity of even identifying to avoid, for instance, ambiguities and to identify a gene is not that trivial for this example. And that this kind of behavior also reflects in the way that the data is generated, produced, structured, and so on. Then you start to have a kind of a data silos in different domains of knowledge, even in the same field, like in the same domain, like subdomains actually. You start to have kind of data silos, like even in life science in this example, where you're gonna have like one data source that will be describing like gene expression, another one ontology, that's about corresponding genes in different species, and also protein interaction. And then we start, but for the scientists, it's really important actually to have ideally the full picture to be able to derive new discoveries and new insights actually from out of the data. Then it's really important to go from this kind of data silo to something more like highly interconnected, that this knowledge is represented in a way that we can see the full picture over it. And this goes into the direction of adopting the fair data principles to make the data more findable, accessible, interpretable, and reusable. Then if now I would like to be back to like the importance of why we should have identifiers for trying to avoid these ambiguities also, and also to better represent the knowledge in these fields. For instance, one interesting fact is time for coffee. And if I don't give you more context to you, probably you're thinking like to take some coffee break, but actually time for coffee, it's the name of a protein. And this protein is present in different organisms, actually species. One example could be the Arabidopsis thaliana. Then you can see also like even the name by itself, like the time for coffee, how it was the name of this protein done. It's in capital letters, actually. Then it means that there's some implicit information that says, okay, this is not just a time for coffee, but actually a name of a protein. Then if you go to the UniProt database, you're going to have several proteins in different species called time for coffee. And then to exactly avoid this kind of ambiguity, because we need some precision in scientific data, then we're going to have some identifiers, and then the UniProt database will have some accession numbers to specifically identify that given protein that's present in Arabidopsis thaliana as a plant species. Then now I've switched a little bit like from knowledge representation to large language model. Probably most of you are already aware what is it, but I'll briefly introduce it. What's a large language model? It's a deep learning model trying to predict the next word in a sentence. How is it training? Self-supervised learning on huge amount of text. We use an approach like kind of fill in the blanks learning, where you have like a corpus of text and you try to predict the next word, like kind of a probabilistic model. If you want to generalize it, we can also, instead of thinking it's a next word, could be the next token. And the token can be a part of a word, amino acid, a gene in a given sequence. Then the definition of a language here, it's a vocabulary plus a sequence of tokens that represent information in that language. Then if we go back to our example about the time for coffee protein, the first thing that if you try, I mean, I don't know if now you represent the same behavior, because you can have different, not necessarily the same behavior depending on the model used and so on. But when I ask like time for coffee to this large language model, it starts to hallucinate. Then one of the issues of large language models is hallucination. But also it can be seen, depending on the context, could be seen as a feature because it gives more creativity, for instance. But yeah, in this case here, we are talking about like scientific data. We want some precision. Then we don't want this kind of behavior happening. And then you can clearly see that's how it tries to hallucinate. And the cough protein sounds like a great combo, energizing, enriching, and so on. Then I go giving more context in a way, saying, okay, it's not just time for coffee protein, but is there time for coffee protein, that protein that I showed early at the UniProt database, that's written in capital letters, but still it hallucinates. And finally, when I give more context, I try to like kind of optimize the context and to narrow it down to get like the correct answer, like a more accuracy, a better answer. Then when I say explicitly using the scientific name of the Arabidopsis thaliana, this plant, then finally I have something meaningful out of it. Then you see that even the way that you represent, like the way that you represent your knowledge, like in the question, actually, essentially in the prompt, can have an impact in the accuracy of the large language model. If I go to another example that shows some black box and decisiveness in shoes of large language model, is the seahorse organism, for instance. Then if I ask, is there a seahorse emoji? Then the model say the first thing is that, okay, yes, there is, and then it shows like some hallucinating like emojis, like even a shark there, that's nothing to do. And in the same answer, change the decision. Now, actually, no, there isn't like an emoji specific for that, and suggest some emoji that might be combined and represent the idea, but it's not that evident neither. Then I try to take more decision out of the model, like, but I don't know exactly how it's reasoning and so on behind scenes, because it's kind of a black box. Then I narrow it down and ask, okay, is there a seahorse emoji? You say yes or no. Then it says yes. Then, okay, let me check, try to realize in this black box why you saying that's yes. And then I ask to show me the seahorse emoji. And then finally, it's not a seahorse emoji, it's a combination of emoji. And then exactly the answer would be no, essentially. Then you see that there is this indecisiveness in shoes and black box with this kind of example here. But the idea, fortunately, actually, we can try to tackle, mitigate these LLM issues. One way to go for that is doing kind of context optimization, more or less the example that I mentioned about the time for coffee protein, where I did some prompt engineering, some kind of going more into the direction of prompt tuning. We can also have something more sophisticated, like a retrieval augmented generation that will rely on external source of information to answer the given question or prompt. Then the context optimization is more about what the model needs to know. And the LLM optimization is more about how the model needs to act. That will go into more direction of fine tuning. The good thing of doing LLM optimization is that we maximize the consistency of behavior. And when you do context optimization, you maximize the response accuracy. And of course, you can have both of them to get the good of both worlds, essentially, and better address these LLM issues that I just mentioned before. One next thing is that, actually knowledge representation can play a key role for compensating tackling actually the issues of large language models. If you take a knowledge graph as a form of knowledge representation, we can compensate actually several cons of large language model with the pros of knowledge graph. Like for instance, decisiveness, accuracy of knowledge graphs can compensate the hallucination decisiveness problem, also the domain specific lack of knowledge and so on. And the same way that large language models can also tackle the cons of knowledge graphs, like incompleteness, lacking knowledge, understanding, unseen facts. Then you can have the pros like general knowledge, language processing, generalizability. And the good thing is that knowledge graph, and if you think about also scientific data that I just presented, you can have like just a highly curated domain expertise there that's not necessarily encoded in the large language model, because often what's encoded there is the general knowledge. Also because of the nature of the model, it's like a probabilistic model. Then combining both actually is a virtual circle. Actually, we can tackle the issues of one another by combining them actually. Then that being said, one interesting application of large language models is to act as an interface for scientific knowledge graph exploration, scientific data exploration, essentially in general. In the case of the SIB, we have several resources that currently they are speaking between quotes the same language, is Sparkle. That's a structured query language for knowledge graphs, essentially, in the form of resource description, using the resource description framework, RDF graphs, to be more precise. And the good thing is that these different scientific database, you can think like that, they are represented like using ontologies. They have like the knowledge how they are represented. Also, they become more and more interpretable, even though they are distributed. They are not like a single data store essentially. They are not necessarily only on the domain of the SIB, but they could be co-sponsored by SIB. For instance, Uniprot is one of the examples here. Then the fact that they have the knowledge well represented, currently and accessible using the same query language, it makes possible for us to have to combine these different that was before kind of different data silos now in one single way essentially. Then if you want to know more about it, the semantic web of data of the Institute of Bioinformatics, you can check this paper that we published in 2023. Then as you can see, like the fact of having these different data stores being able to be queryable with the same language, it allows us to have some kind of federation when querying. Then it means that the user with a single query can actually retrieve data and combine at the federation level the information that they are looking for, the user is looking for. Like for instance, if I go back to the example of the three databases that I mentioned, gene expression and orthology, that are corresponding genes, and disease that could be, for instance, Uniprot, the user now is able to answer really complex questions like that one in the right side. What are the human genes involved in lung cancer with an ortholog expressed in the mouse? Orthologs means corresponding genes in different species. Then, but actually, even if it's possible now to query these different data sources, it's not that straightforward, because the user, first of all, would need to write this kind of complex queries in the right side. And to write that, they would need to know the Sparkle query language, and even more complex, to know how the data is represented, how the knowledge is represented essentially in these different data sources to be able to compose these such queries. Then, but to tackle this issue, we could use a large language model to try to generate these Sparkle queries. And the good thing is here is that if you are able to generate the correct Sparkle query, we're gonna retrieve the information from highly curated and with high quality data from these different data sources that actually often won't be able to be answered by any large language model because it lacks domain specific knowledge, for instance. Yeah, then the idea that we had first, it was, okay, that was in 2023. It was first we had the idea, okay, let's fine tuning a large language model for the task of Sparkle query generation. We did this work in collaboration with the Riken Institute in Japan. The challenge here is that we had very little training data. It means that we have really very few pairs of Sparkle queries and questions corresponding to these Sparkle queries in natural language. But the good thing is that often we have examples of pairs of question and queries that are available for these data sources. And then the queries look like one simple queries like this one here. And you can see that there is some gap between the question of the user, like we say, like what are the development stage present in this database? And essentially, if you look at the query, you don't have any time appearing like developmental stage. And then here it's enriched with some comment that this class here with this identifier represent developmental stage. And then we also thought, okay, maybe we should also try to provide some more hints, like kind of a semantic enrichment of the Sparkle queries through comments and also meaningful variable names, like here stage, for instance. That our hypothesis was, okay, if we do that, it can also help the model to better generate the Sparkle queries. Then just another example here of this problem, like these connections between the question and how it's can be implemented in reality. For this question, in which taxa is the insulin protein present? You can see that you're gonna have, again, some identifiers of specific property, but also some acronyms that actually represent, in this case, insulin and so on. that we thought, okay, one solution to that probably is to first we're going to augment the question query set that we have, but also semantically enrich them, and then probably this will benefit the model to generate better Sparkle queries from natural language text. Then first thing that we did, it was, okay, let's check what kind of knowledge bases exist that has a lot of queries, example, and questions, and one of them is Wikidata. Probably some of you are familiar with. It's a sister project of Wikipedia. Then we thought, okay, let's fine-tune a large language model like OpenYAMA with these Wikidata question query examples. The idea is that, okay, maybe we would have some learning being transferred to domain-specific knowledge graph. And then we also develop an approach for extending an initial set of queries and questions in natural language. In this example here, for instance, I think we had around 12 example queries, and then we augmented it, and then I think the result was around 300. The augmentation, it was mostly done with one hop in the graph, like adding one more attribute at least, but it was not only the case. And we also, of course, we did, as I mentioned, try to enrich the generated queries actually with more comments and also with minimal variables based on the ontologies that were used for deriving the knowledge graph, essentially. Then based on that, we also fine-tuned a model, first only with the domain-specific automatically generated Sparkle queries and natural language text. And secondly, we also try to see, okay, if it was possible to have some learning be transferred by the Wikidata fine-tuned large language model based one that we did. Then how we did this evaluation at that time, we considered the OpenYAMA with 7 billion parameters. We set the temperature parameter equal to 0 to have less creativity in tests, actually, to be less creative, the model. The knowledge base that we tested, the specific domain-specific one was BG, is the one that contains information about gene expression, and has around 7 billion trips, at least at that time. Probably now has more. And then we evaluated by using some machine translation output metrics like BLEU, SPBLEU, and Meteor and Rouge. Then the experiments that we did, it was divided in 4 kind of experiments. The first one, it was to say, okay, let's see if the model by itself as it is can generate any meaningful Sparkle query based on natural language text. Then the answer, it was no. The model didn't know how to generate any meaningful Sparkle query over Wikidata and BG. And it means that the model has almost no information about how to do that. And then our second experiment, we just considered the question and query set of BG. And then we noticed that we had a significant improvement when providing meaningful variables and comments in the query. And the third experiment, we considered the fine-tuned model of Wikidata for doing that. And we noticed that actually, instead of improving the model, in some cases, actually, it was deteriorating the accuracy. Then that's showing that was actually introduced some noise in the training. But when we had with data BG with meaningful variables and comments, then we got slightly better results. And to conclude about this specific work, we did an approach that we semantically augmented the set of questions to Sparkle query over scientific knowledge graphs. And then we noticed that it contributes to improve the performance of a large language model like OpenYAMA. Rewriting this Sparkle query to provide more context through comments and meaningful variable names considerably improves the OpenYAMA also model for the task of generating Sparkle queries from natural language text. And the knowledge transfer actually might deteriorate the LLM performance for the Sparkle generation over a domain-specific knowledge base, such as was during our evaluation for the BG knowledge graph, essentially. Then actually afterwards in 2024, we said, okay, let's also explore more about just using LLMs, but now focusing more on the context optimization. And then we did a kind of a prompt tuning with RAG approach. The problem at hand was the same. Actually, we want to generate Sparkle queries from natural language text because it's hard and time consuming. And we start to notice that the very large language models actually start to be great on it, but they still need context. And another problem that we have at hand is that for large and complex knowledge graphs, finding the right context is not trivial. For instance, for the example of time for coffee, we start to get a better answer when we provide the scientific name, but we could think, okay, maybe if I provide a common name of a species, like for Homo sapiens, it would be human, for instance, but might be that will not be as helpful as providing the scientific name, even more if you consider for species that are not that well known, since we're talking about also a probabilistic model. Then we also, another problem that we had was we needed a minimal structured way to describe these different Sparkle endpoints, these different access modes through that's done with the Sparkle language to facilitate the large language model based Sparkle query generation. Then we thought, okay, we had to properly describe the Sparkle endpoints with some metadata. And we start to design like an approach that could be generic, reusable, that works for most endpoints, even new ones, that not only focus on our specific ones, essentially. Then we thought, okay, we had to automatically generate a description of what classes and predicates are used, because as you know, for when you're applying ontologies for binary knowledge graphs, we are dealing with the open world assumption. Then does it mean that all classes and properties that are defined in ontology will be actually stated in the graph? Then we need to know kind of a data-aware schema, how the data is really structured. Like for instance, a protein is encoded by a gene. Then we also needed like to have these examples of queries and questions, since we are talking about different data sources, and then we want us to be generic and reusable, a way of standardizing the way that we represent the queries. And then noise representation again plays a key role here. I will talk a little bit more in my next slide. And all that make them accessible through the same Sparkle endpoint that holds the data, essentially. That this way the system can retrieve, index, and use them automatically. Then for the first one, the good news is that we have developed an approach that we can do automatically, even for very large knowledge graph with more than 200 billion triples. And the good thing is also about the example queries that often they already exist, because even when you are designing some knowledge graph, we have some competence questions and so on, that in a way, often you have already, and even like real users, like when it's deployed, then we start to have real use cases, and that's really meaningful for being able to generate the correct Sparkle query based on the natural language text. Then just to say, knowledge representation is at the core of our solution. If I go back to the example of the pairs of queries and questions, we also consider it as a really valuable metadata. Then we built an ontology to describe them. And this ontology was built based on existing ones, like for instance, in terms that are present in the Shackle language, and also schema.org and so on. And if you want to know a little bit more about it, you can check our work that was published like recently in the beginning of the year in the Giga Science Journal. Then here it's how all this kind of context optimization approach was implemented for generating the Sparkle queries, the approach that we did. This is the example of the system architecture that was in place. I won't go into details, but it's just to say that we divide like in 4 main components, where one is dedicated for indexing, like indexing the query examples that they are well represented like in a structured way. The extraction of a data-aware schema that also based on existing vocabularies, like vocabulary of interlinked data sets. We also use like checks, shape expression that's for describing actually, it's a kind of a schema language for RDF graphs. Then we all do that at a kind of a pre-processing phase. And for the second component is a prompt building component, where it's responsible actually to try to build the prompt in an optimal way. And finally, we have the Sparkle generation component that you receive this prompt and you try to generate the query. And one module that's really important here it is the, I don't know if you see my mouse maybe, it is the validated Sparkle query based on the endpoint schema, because the model can generate some queries that are not good, because for instance, it can state a property that actually doesn't exist, but we have the information, what are the properties, what are the relations that are existing in the data source, then we can try and provide some hints to fix it. And then actually often the model is able to fix it. And finally, once the query is generated, we can execute it and present in a nice way to the user through the Spark execution component. Then, of course, we did some evaluation. This was preliminary evaluation that we did like past year. Currently, we are working on another paper that makes more like a kind of a benchmark approach out of it. But here you can already see that we have good results, and also price-wise. For instance, when we consider the GPT for all with the RAG and with validation, we got like a F1 score was quite high of 0.921. And we were most successful we were successful in most of our queries. And then we when consider without just trying a zero-shot approach with just as the model it is, the model was not able to generate any query. Almost like the F1 score, it was around 0.08 for the GPT for all, for instance. We also tried other large language models, as you can see here in details. Then finally, if you want to check it more how it works, you can. It's available, publicly available. You can go to this website, exposit.org/chat. Currently, it's deployed, I think, over 7 different knowledge graphs that are distributed. Uniprot being, I think, the largest one with, as I mentioned, around 200 billion triples. I think BG probably is around 10 billion nowadays. And so on. Then all that's also available, the code in the GitHub. We also have a paper that shows the preliminary results that was published last year. And then you can also check it. It's publicly available. And there is also the components are available as a pip package in this address. Then finally, to conclude my presentation, one thing that I want to stress is that like one approach is not necessarily better than another one, like prompt tuning versus fine tuning, or both actually. That the decision on what kind of approach we should use, in my opinion, should be really use case driven. And then we need to consider what kind of available resources we have, the constraint. For instance, if we're talking about sensible data, you wouldn't like to use like an external service that you're gonna pass like sensible information through. Then that would probably better to have a fine-tuned model that could even potentially be run locally, either in a local network or locally, like in your own computer, since you start to have a better and better GPUs in notebooks, essentially. And one important thing that I want to stress also is that, knowledge representation, of course, including ontologies, can serve as a basis toward building distrustful for a large language model-based applications for scientific data exploration. Why that? One of the big reasons is that even if the model still cannot generate the perfect Sparkle query, or even sometimes the worst could be actually if it generates a Sparkle query that can be run and then shows some results that sounds to be correct, but they are not necessarily correct. Then still cautions needed. But the good thing here is that we don't have any more that kind of black box to approach for answering the questions. And that's really important for scientific data, because you can check the Sparkle queries and see what's going on and see if it's valid or not. For instance, the answer that's been given. There is a way to go back. Of course, it will require a little bit of a knowledge how of the language, of the Sparkle query language, and also how the data is structured, but it makes possible to see exactly how the answer was derived. Then the large language model actually holds a great promise for scientific data exploration, but as I said, caution needs to be exercised when using them. And one important thing also that I didn't put here in the slide, but one advantage of knowledge representation as a form of, for instance, of knowledge graph is that it can be used for multi-hop question answer task. That's usually not possible when you have single documents kind of approach. Then I would like to thank you again for the attention. And also, yeah, I finished my presentation with the sunset in Zurich. He is our team, actually. Yeah, then thank you. If you have any question, please don't hesitate to ask them.
Yeah, thanks, Tarcisio. And then I'm gonna end up the recording first.